Welcome to Snakes and Otters, a pointless discussion of eternal questions. Get ready, we're about to live in your head rent-free. This is episode 112.
I am Martin.
And I'm Robert.
And I'm Francis, sitting in the captain's chair again. This is kind of a continuation of last episode, folks. We did quotations from the great Ernest Hemingway last time, kind of as meant to be a setup, I suppose, for this episode. This is meant to be kind of like the crescendo of our two-episode Hemingway Palooza. That's probably not unfair. We did our Shatner Palooza back in March, and that was a big dog thing. But we're going to talk about Ernest Hemingway today. One of my heroes, probably, in my opinion, one of the greatest writers that ever has walked the planet. And I think you won't get any argument about that from anybody. Everybody recognizes that he is one of the greatest folks. If you, we love Ken Burns around here, of course. He's one of our favorite guys, too. And as we record this, he did a three-part special, about 6 hours on Hemingway, just a few months ago on PBS. And it was, it was like a dream come true for me because I discovered Hemingway. We've all known Hemingway. But I really discovered him about 2 years ago, and I realized when I started my writing, I don't want to say career, but, getting into more of that, the more you realize that you're supposed to emulate those who have done it well. And his is the name that always everybody comes back to. They say in the Ken Burns documentary that Hemingway didn't put the furniture in the room, but he rearranged it in such a way that every writer who has come after him has to deal with that setup. He's changed so much, and we'll talk a little bit about what that means. But he was one of the first American superstar authors. And he has stayed the test of time. He really has. People still read him today. And that's not just because he's so accessible and so easy to read, because he is, but because the man was just so amazingly gifted.
Let me ask you a question, because, Francis, I've not really read much Hemingway, which is one of those things that you're almost embarrassed to admit. But I admit it. And one of the things that you commented that about the Ken Burns said that he rearranged the furniture. Mm-hmm. I don't have a context for that other than asking this question. Mm-hmm. So, prior to the 20th century, a lot of fiction, a lot of writing, period, was very verbose, flowery.
You're nailing it. That's right.
It was very convoluted. It was as if St. Paul were writing all fiction.
That's a very good way of putting it.
I mean, I love me some St. Paul in the Bible, but he is the most complex writer in the Bible.
Oh, yeah.
His syntax and grammar sucks by modern standards. Mm-hmm. They didn't use punctuation, and it shows.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's very similar to, if you want to go back to, say, Emerson or even Thoreau, if you read some of those early folks, or James Fenimore Cooper, which was very much an action-oriented type thing, and yet he still wrote that way. Melville's a great example. Very complex, very deep, very thematic and all that stuff like that. Very unrealistic in many ways. Twain tees a lot of this up and brings in the realism of things.
Yes.
So there's that precursor of that people realize.
Which is why I think that Hemingway gives so much credit to Twain for the American novel.
That's right, because that's the room that Hemingway is working out of. But Hemingway, his style it's very journalistic. But it's
because he was a journalist.
He was a journalist first, and that's where he starts this idea. And if you read Hemingway, it's short, declarative sentences.
He is probably I would guess, this is where you're going with this, and this is a good way to put it. He was one of the first American writers, to master what is now a maxim of all writing.
Right.
Show, don't tell.
That's a lot of it right there. But do it in as few words as possible.
Well, yes.
Yeah, that's right.
Most of the iceberg is below the surface.
I'm glad you brought that up. That's one of his...
That's the idea behind
the idea.
Hemingway is he's going to show you part of the iceberg. The rest of it you've got to figure out it's underneath.
That's right.
Right, and that's what show don't tell means.
Yeah.
Show is not describing every detail in the room. That's what telling is.
That's right.
Like if I write something that says that Joe laughed, as opposed to a different way of phrasing it, that's probably not a good example, but it's how you go about the writing in a way that is clear without using more words.
That's right. It's very minimalistic.
And you don't need to cover the texture of the drapes.
That's correct.
In a room. You don't even need to tell that there are drapes in the room, unless it's germane to the story.
Right. It's very. I mean, it's taking all those. I mean, he's still a very sensualistic writer. He's not writing what they call in a white room, where you have no idea what the place around you looks like. You get all that, but you get it from a very small amount of detail, written unbelievably tight. I mean, and Stephen King is famous for his detesting of adverbs. Hemingway doesn't do much of that to begin with, because they're extraneous. He has no dialogue tags when there's only two people in a room. That was unheard of before that, and yet it's the standard now.
Right. As a matter of fact, I was just reading an article talking about dialogue tags, and when to use. Because you could do blah 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 said Mary, blah 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 said Joe, blah 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 said Mary, and back and forth.
Yeah.
There's a great example in the writing about when to use them and when not to. Because when you have two people, you could have an entire conversation and only say who the first two saids are.
That's right.
But then that gets very confusing as well.
It can be, and if you did, a master like Hemingway knew when to drop one in to keep you oriented. But the dialogue goes so fast, and so much is conveyed. Just because he's doing it very well, he's dropping those pieces of that iceberg down there at the top, and it somehow your imagination is fired by that, and you're filling in all this stuff. It's the quintessential active reading. You didn't when you were told everything before, you didn't have to do that. You just kind of blew right through it, and wasn't that nice? He's actually engaging the thought processes, and he was a master at it. Especially as you read some of his really, really good works. We'll talk about those in a second. To bring that through.
His novel, he wrote novels, stories that were set in times that were common to the reader.
That's correct, yes.
If I'm writing a science fiction fantasy novel, I'm going to have to put more descriptions in. World building.
That's
what it is.
World building is what it is. Yeah.
And while every story and novel has some degree of that, the more common the setting to the reader, the less world building you have to do. Mm-hmm. If I want to say that somebody got into a truck and went down the road, I don't have to say what year and brand and model and how many doors were in the truck and whether it had a camper on it.
Yeah, the world is implicit to the reader.
That's
exactly.
Right. Hemingway wouldn't give you all that stuff unless it was relevant.
Yeah.
Unless it
now
had
the
relevant.
Interesting thing will be. Now, granted, we won't be around for this, but in 150, 200 years, how well will his stories last? Because some of what he wrote will not be implicit to the reader.
You're exactly right.
It's an interesting thing.
There's a universal quality to his writing, and if you read him closely, you'll pick this up.
Is it universal because...
It was universal for them?
Yeah, because it's still universal for our context. And I'm not denigrating the style in that sense.
Yeah, that's right.
It's just an observation that
that's kind of the subject
it works
matter
for
he picks.
us.
Yeah, his style will always be around. It really works so well. The content of the subject matter he talks about, well, maybe not. I think that you will find that, for example, my personal favorite of his, and I've got a copy of it right here, in the Hemingway Library edition, is "The Sun Also Rises." It was written in the 1920s. It's what gave rise to the term "the Lost Generation." We talked about this a little bit in the last episode. It's about this malaise that comes over the post-World War I generation that's living in Paris. It's semi-autobiographical in many respects. The characters that are in here, he's Jake, the main character. It's sort of kind of him, and Lady Brett, she's sort of kind of the woman that he was kind of working with there. So it's got a lot to that, and it kind of encapsulates what was going on at that time, but it's still universal enough that even 100 years later,
the themes can be universal.
Exactly,
yes.
That's what keeps it. That's what keeps people still reading this book.
Yeah, what I'm referring to is the stuff that he doesn't have to put in, like the truck.
Yeah.
Will people still even be driving trucks in 200 years? For that to make sense.
There's some truth to that. Yeah.
We can we can read a novel that's set in the 1800s. Now, if it was written in the 1800s, it's probably going to have a whole lot of that descriptive stuff in it. that we might not
Well,
want in it today. But
Melville's probably a good example. He puts all the whaling information and the sea information that you need in there.
well, now that's
to keep
different. That's a need.
That's correct.
Because not everybody has that context. So the everyday. It's just a thought that occurred to me. How much of the everyday that is now is going to be relevant in 200 years? My kids reading something like Hemingway, they're going to look at that and think, "Oh my God, that must have been a very boring time." There's no, there's some radio, but there's no internet, there's no television, there's no gaming, there's no cell phones, which makes up their entire world,
which kind of saddens me in many ways. Because,
it's very sad.
Yeah, because
especially when the bill comes.
You should be, but so many of those things that you should see in that they should be. My son is right now reading. The reason the Farewell to Arms is not here on my desk with us here as we record in the Baxter Building is because my son's reading it, and he's got it over in the other room. And he's fascinated by, and he's the millennial generation, 20, and he's fascinated by the prose. He's fascinated by the story. Farewell to Arms is probably his best work. It was certainly his biggest commercial success. It was technically his
which
third.
is kind of sad because that came relatively
early. It was his technically his third novel. In many respects, his second. The first one, Torrents of Spring, almost doesn't count. It just kind of got out there, and it never really... He wasn't Hemingway then. It was The Sun Also Rises that...
Boom. He was just earning.
Yeah, he was just earning. Boom! That's where it became a multi-gazillion seller. In fact, he even dedicated it to his first wife and turned over all the rights to her. So that way they would always be taken care of, because that it still continues to sell.
Yeah.
Even today. But Farewell to Arms is the big one. And it's tied directly to his experience in World War I.
Yeah.
Because in many respects, yet again, that character there is him as well. He is wounded. He has an affair with a woman his nurse falls in love with, which Hemingway did that very same thing. It ended badly. Now, in real life, she just kind of went and got married on him, and he was just devastated with all that. Whereas,
that's ending badly from his point of view.
It is, but if you read the novel, and I don't want to spoil it if you haven't read it. Yeah, there's a tragic ending. Okay, I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah.
And that's just and that's one of the reasons. And he ends it kind of right after that. He just after the tragic ending happens, he just kind of walks out in the street and goes off. And of course, people they lose their minds over this stuff. You don't do that in the 20s. But that's something that's been brought out when life is short and war is hell. That's the experience that you work with. That's what resonated. That's one of the reasons Farewell to Arms. It's so well written, and it's very personal. And that's not something they were used to before. You didn't get a lot of that out there. There's exceptions, of course. Sun Also Rises the same way. And in many respects, Hemingway stole from his own life, which, for many people, that's absolute recipe for disaster and boredom, because most people don't live the life that Hemingway lived.
Right. That is one of the reasons why, to me, he's so fascinating. Even modern writers today that are great writers really don't live fascinating lives.
No, they spend their time writing books.
Yeah.
At best.
I always like to talk about King because I think he's one of the greatest writers, even though the snobby literature folks look down on him, but that's mainly because he's so much more successful than they are.
Oh yeah, he goes over there.
But he's also become an incredible writer.
Oh yeah,
and as we said in the last episode, and we like to talk about, craft is such a big deal.
Yeah, it's everything.
And even he does not live a fantastical life. Now he's done some really great things, but it's mainly because his writing has allowed him to. Yeah. Like, he's been in a band with several other writers, relatively famous people. He still does that, but his life is actually pretty damn simple compared to Hemingway.
Yeah, he's been married to the same woman for all this time,
yes.
And that's just
she's put up with him.
She's put with, which is kind of different from Hemingway, who had 4 wives.
4 wives. Yeah. So let's do that a little bit. So, Hemingway he's a follow-on, not just to Twain, but to a degree to someone like Roosevelt, who also had this, incredible full life of charging up San Juan Hill and,
Teddy Roosevelt,
exploring the Amazon, African safaris, the whole bit. This is also very much Hemingway's life. He's in the war. He's an ambulance driver, living in Paris as a expatriate type journalist exile in this fascinating circle of people, and then also living all over the place, from Idaho to Cuba,
Yeah.
African safaris, 2 plane crashes.
Well, and he's also as a correspondent, which enabled him to do some of this.
Yes.
That's why he was in Paris. That's how he participates in the Spanish Civil War, which was huge formation for him. That's where From Whom the Bell Tolls. That was that experience put forth. Yeah, one of his other great novels that he wrote.
Just like with Orwell, he's a contemporary of Orwell. He's a contemporary of Faulkner. This is their experience. So there's 2 things I want to tease out for you, Francis. I want you to do for me. Talk a little bit more about what Lost Generation means.
Oh.
And then I
great
want
idea.
You,
Great point.
Yeah, and I want you to then, as I always do, especially with your heroes, I want you to push why is a personal hero to you?
Oh, well, I mean, I'll answer the second question first.
No, do the first question.
Okay.
Because
all right.
Lost Generation is an important context.
Yeah. It is
in this interwar period.
It is mostly from his work's perspective. The Lost Generation is most clearly encapsulated in The Sun Also Rises. The 2 are linked together almost as if they're biologically the same. Farewell to Arms, somewhat, but that's a little bit earlier than that. It's kind of like what produces The Lost Generation. But I'm glad you brought that up because this kind of gets to that universal aspect that we talk about here. After World War I, which has been forgotten for us, overshadowed by World War II, because we knew that our grandparents were the surviving generation of that, but World War I was lost to us. The technological world, the old world of everything is a grand display. War is this gentleman's game. That's just from that context. That the colonialism that went on, the British Empire, the American Great White Fleet, all this world that had culminated into this powder keg has exploded, and it's gone. It's totally gone. We don't think that way anymore.
It's destroyed everything they knew.
Yeah, exactly. Not just the people, not just the countries, but their entire philosophy on the world around them.
Yeah, I mean, it's industrialized death.
Exactly. And that's all. It was unsustainable, but they didn't realize that. And this is all destroyed. Yeah. So everything they were taught about the way the world should be, we are civilizing the rest of the world with our colonialism. That's gone. Our system of government is important, and we will impose that upon others. That's gone. Well, I mean, it's some things die slower than others.
But yes, I mean, what they have known, autocracies destroyed.
Correct. The concept of democracy is no longer seen as a ridiculous experiment. In fact, it's become the way things are supposed to be. Working for the good of all people was unheard of before. It was only the elites, and there is kind of almost like a revolution that comes at the basic level. I'm thinking, all that we knew is gone. We don't know what this world is supposed to be because we know it's got death. Yeah. Lots and lots of death.
This thing that we invested in, this technology and this advancement, has led us only to destroy ourselves.
And nationalism too.
Yeah,
that's a big thing there.
Right,
both empire and nationalism, same thing.
And we've talked about this before. That today we see apocalyptic, meaning nuclear.
Yeah.
But to them, they lived in apocalypse.
Correct. That's right. Where everything changed, and those who survived have an enormous amount of PTSD. Mm-hmm. That's not just the soldiers either. Those that stayed at home, their family structures are destroyed.
It's a different kind of PTSD.
It's correct. I'm speaking broadly here, but they all experience traumas at some level, and after that's over, are having to find out who the hell is this world? What the hell is this world that I live in?
The whole world's searching for meaning.
That's correct. Very much so. And that's what the Lost Generation are. Those who came of age after World War I. That came into this, a lot of them are survivors of it, like Hemingway, and said, nothing matters anymore. You would think there would, and that's one of the reasons that, the idea of nihilism comes back again. Yeah. It was not new for them, but there's a certain malaise that comes from that, saying, well, nothing else matters.
I think that's interesting, because if you look at similar events, I don't know if that's always the response.
That's true. Yeah, I would agree.
So I want to juxtapose that with the American version of this, because we're talking about what is essentially a European thing, not an American thing.
Very
So,
much so.
because things in America didn't really change, other than we were now really and truly. I mean, we were with the defeat of Spain 20 years prior, but now we really are a world power.
We hold the mortgage on everything.
And we yes. But you know, you look, the closest thing that you could come to this kind of an event would be the American Civil War.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Especially in the South, but even quite a bit in the North, because things changed there as well, just not to the same degree. But you know, the American response after the American Civil War was, especially in the South, was, all right, things have changed. I'm just going to leave. I'm going out west.
Yeah.
There's a huge amount of that, yes.
Huge migration to the west. The American Civil War was the impetus to finish the conquest of the West.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't mean that necessarily in
a way of
the negative way.
A way of starting a new life.
Yeah, it's a way of starting a new life.
Because the old one is gone, and
but
we
it was
don't
done
like
with
what was
optimism.
replaced.
Yeah, we don't like what replaced it. So rather than deal with trying to deal with that where we were, where there's all these reminders, we struck off for what is essentially wilderness, and built something new out there under the strictures of the new reality.
Right.
It was an expression of American optimism, even though the South came from this very horrible place of slavery and was defeated in a not dissimilar way to Nazi Germany in World War I. Not that quite that badly, because it wasn't as widespread. Although Atlanta and Richmond would probably beg to differ. You know, you're talking about all of Germany versus a few of the major cities. But their entire way of life was totally upended. Even down to the poor white farmers who owned very few, if any, slaves. And so many of them, including former slaves, went west. That's what a lot of people don't know that much about. There's a lot of black cowboys, not just white guys. So I just find this is one of those things that is fascinating in juxtaposition to me.
Yeah.
The difference in how one continent versus the other responded.
There was nowhere to go. There was no way to rebuild.
Well, that's right. It was
a
world war. All of a sudden, there was no outlet like the West was for Americans.
Americans, by the time World War I is over, the American West is largely done as a Western setting.
Yeah, it's been integrated into the.
We've got all 48 states 2 years before the World War II World War I starts. So there's not even creating new states to be done. There, all the territory are no longer territories.
So it's this. You're right, Francis. It's hard for us in a modern sense to wrap our brains around what people were going through in that post World War I world, but it was very much a devastation, a seeking the future. What's it going to be like? It's PTSD, it's depression, it's a searching for what did we just do? All the things that we believed in
fought for.
Yeah, and have led us to the apocalypse.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, essentially they discovered that they were false.
So is the difference between the American Civil War and World War I a matter of empty territory? I mean, the response
of size, maybe.
No, I think there is a difference in outlook.
So that's what I'm driving. I
think so.
I think there's a modernistic approach that was in its infancy with the Civil War, but had come to full flower by the time World War I happened. I think there's a technological aspect to this, and I think this was a political system that was. It was easy to see the South and its errors in it, but their political system was essentially the same. It just had a quality. This was two different political systems here: authoritarianism versus democracy. And we recognize that, yes, authoritarianism was bad, but democracy was equally as bad because they killed as many people too. I mean, it kind of takes it above the whole. It's outside politics anymore because there's no winners
Sure.
Yeah.
in World War One.
Yeah.
Whereas in North and South, there's an absolute winner and an
there's
absolute
absolute-
and an absolute loser.
And again, I think there is a difference in the American character because there
Yes.
is
So that's
there is an
exactly.
idea of, okay, we can recover. There's a
We can become better. It's kind of that individualistic outlook that Americans tend to have.
that searching quality that
Yes.
you got to who are Americans? People who left the old world and said, "I'm brave enough to start over."
Right.
The people still in Europe, and this is not to run them down, but it's a different outlook of we don't know how to start over.
Because we've never had to.
We've never had to,
We
but
had
Americans
had
have
this
done
whole
it.
history behind
Americans
us that
have done
we
it.
cling to,
Yeah.
and they loved, and it was part of their, and it
Well, when
incorporated
you
so
live in
much. It's
cities
part of
that
their
are
character.
centuries old,
That's exactly
Mhm.
you know,
and all of a sudden
we're
they're
almost 200. We're only 250 years old in a couple of years
Yeah.
as a country.
Yeah.
Our oldest cities are maybe 100 years older than that as real cities. Even some of those are just small settlements,
Right.
At that
Yeah.
time, if they even existed. So maybe part of that really is a place to go.
Yeah, and all those underpinnings have been pulled out from underneath of
Yeah.
them, both politically and literally in many respects.
So, do you think that by spending all this time in Europe, because he's been over there for World War One, he was over there driving an ambulance in Italy. He spends all that time there, which I'm sure is why he was sent there as a correspondent. Did he come home between the war and then being in Paris? in the 20s?
Yes, he did. He
Okay.
went back and forth because that's
Okay.
how he got to work with the Toronto Star.
Okay,
and,
so-
and of course he gets married during that period of time, and they have their first child, and but that all comes back in. But then he goes to Paris during that time. I don't think he intended to do that, but he loved it so much he would go back there later.
Sure.
It was once it kind of happens.
So the where I'm going with that is that even though he's an American, he's obviously got that individualistic
Very much so.
streak in that what we would recognize as a quintessential American as a Teddy Roosevelt kind of a thing.
Yep.
Because he spends all that time, which is a very formative time in the sense that it is post-war and figuring out how to, because everybody who goes to war has to figure out how to deal with that. I've never been to war, but I understand that much at least. And because he's doing that in a place where everybody else has no idea what to do because they don't have the same background as an American would, maybe that influences him more than being an American.
I think so, and only because he was wounded himself.
Right.
Significantly over there. I mean, there was an idealism that came with him because he joined the ambulance corps long before America was in war.
Right.
He was working for the Italians. And all this changes to the point where this jadedism about what the hell just happened and why does it matter, the fact that he's wounded has a lot to do with that's where Farewell to Arms comes from. And also, The Sun Also Rises, because in that, now, Hemingway was not rendered impotent by his wounds, but the main character of The Sun Also Rises, Jake, which is his avatar, you might say.
Yeah, his alter ego.
His alter ego here, he is, and that was one of Hemingway's most brilliant teeny-weeny additions. By just making that one character change, everything that this character sees is therefore irrelevant because he can't do it. Because the woman, Lady Brett, that's part of this, he has her, but he can never have her. She's attainable and yet never attainable. And she doesn't herself care. She wants them all, but then she also wants none, and that's part of the thing that goes with that. In there, they're just
Well, that's a powerful theme,
It
especially
is.
for men.
rudderless,
You know.
that's
neat word,
that
yeah.
impotence is kind of the core thing at the middle of all this, realizing none of this matters, and that's why it's been
Well,
said. The book
in a
is
way,
about
that's a very
nothing.
sad statement in and of itself.
Very much so.
That
Oh,
if
yeah.
you can't screw it, nothing matters.
Well, that's kind of way. Well,
Which I understand that. Don't get me wrong. I understand that
you
theme
can never
definitely.
truly love as he wishes to love.
Well, as anybody who, sex is not just a physical thing.
Not at all.
Maybe for men it mostly is, but wind blows and we get excited.
But it ties to your whole notion of your self-worth.
It does.
Absolutely.
It ties to your notion of self-worth, and it does tie to a metaphysical self-worth, because it is how we participate in creation.
That's right. And we can
with
know,
the Creator.
and that can never happen in Jake's case.
Yes.
And worse, that he's so in love with this woman, and she loves him. They say this all the time throughout the thing, but they can never do anything with it.
And a woman who says to a man who can't get it up that doesn't matter is just telling him that you don't matter.
That's
It
correct.
really is.
Even though she means well.
Right.
Quite
Even
often.
because women approach, again, this is overgeneralization, but it's a generalization, so it is, yes, generally true. Sex for women is at least, if not twice, 3 times, 10 times as much mental and emotional as it is physical.
It's relational. For
Yeah.
them.
Whereas for us, it is absolutely relational, but
Yeah.
again, wind blows the wrong way, and
Well,
we're ready.
biology for us is kind of the volume's turned way up in many respects.
Yeah.
And Lady Brett knows this, but she's willing to screw this young bullfighter because he's got a nice butt, and she does this there's no ending to spoil. When it all goes right, Jake's the one she calls to come get her. And that's kind of how the book ends. It's, and he's saying, wouldn't it be great if life were better than this? And it's a very sad type thing, but
So does Jake go get her?
Well, yeah, absolutely, he goes gets her.
See, that's looks like
See, that's
no,
the
no.
thing. He's on the beach, and she calls, and she says, it's kind of over. Can you come? He's got to go to Barcelona and get her. And she's staying in a hotel room. He goes in there, and because she's basically robbed the cradle. I mean, he was of age, but this young bullfighter that they saw, he's half her age.
She misses Mrs. Robinson
In many respects, that's correct, like that. And she actually ruins the boy's career in many respects because he's not supposed to be doing this. The word gets out that he's doing it, and his reputation suffers because in the Spanish culture, that's a thing. It's he's supposed to be devoted to this craft, but also because while he's messing with her, he ain't fighting the bulls like he was.
Yeah, I was gonna say this is like Mick telling Rocky, stay away from the women because it robs your legs.
Well, there's a lot of that to that, and it's just a fascinating study of all. And I'm just giving you 3 of the characters in that book.
Yeah.
It's if for our listeners, if you want to dip your toe into Hemingway, and I'm kind of this is probably early in our episode to talk about this, but
I don't think we're early in the episode anymore.
That's right. But I would recommend there's 4 books, 4 of his novels. Now, short stories are great. There are plenty of collections in them. If you like to read short stories, Snows from Kilimanjaro is one of the very best. There's many, many others. But if you like the novels,
don't give him 4. Give him 1.
Okay. I am. I'm just going to say. I'm just going to list the 4, but I'm going to say here's the one you want. The 4 biggies he has, of course, Farewell to Arms. We've talked about it. Sun Also Rises. We've talked about it. For Whom the Bell Tolls. Very huge. And his later work, The Old Man and the Sea, which was much, much later. It was kind of his last hurrah. Any of those would be good. I recommend, personally, The Sun Also Rises, which we've been talking about. That's the one to start with. It's not long at all. And it really kind of lays down everything that came after this.
That's a relative term. It really is, because,
absolutely.
when I think of a long novel, I think Stephen King long. Somebody else might think, 300 pages is a long novel. 300 pages, things just getting started.
Well, yeah, that's right. Well, I mean, sitting here, got the book in my hand. I can tell you how many pages the darn thing is.
Because I look at that and I would not think that's a long novel, but I know that other people would look at that and think, oh yeah, that's a big book.
290 pages, which is
here. Let's pause for a minute because I think we did a good job right there, Francis, with talking about the lost generation and what that means, and grasping this idea of a Europe adrift, and a cultural, the cultural center of the universe adrift after the war. So then I want you to then we'll do the whole deal about why is a personal hero to you, but I think it's time for bourbon break.
Yeah,
yes,
no, we got to do that here, and we've actually cracked a new bourbon this go around that we're all sharing. It's Russell's Reserve. We talked about it a little bit last time, but we said we would get to it right away, and we are. 10 years old, this bad boy.
It's got a good, rich color,
doesn't it? Though I mean, it looks so good in the bottle, and we're each kind of sipping on it here, drinking a little bit of it as we go. It's got a nice back of the mouth burn. I thought.
Yep.
It's not an esophageal burn or a nasal burn in any ways. And when we say burn, that's a good thing.
Right. It's that. Yeah. you want to call it the heat, the tingle, whatever. But
Yeah, it's and that there's a little sweetness, just a tad of sweetness after the fact in the mouth and on the lips.
yeah,
I wasn't expecting that. Sometimes you get those harsh burns. This is not that at all.
no, it's not. This is
Very
not harsh.
mild, very smooth.
That first bite
Yeah,
is a bit.
It's kind of a pop.
Pop, yeah, because it's not harsh the way I would think of some, but it's got it hits you quick, but it is, overall it's very mild, and it's got a slow move down your throat and into your stomach, but it's not intense. It's not an angel's envy kind of a burn that hits you in the esophagus and the stomach. It's a little bit more subtle than that, but a similar movement, I guess would be a good way to put it.
Little citrusy.
I hadn't considered that, but you're right. It does. Now that you've articulated the word, I would have never picked that out of the air. But you're exactly right. It does have that.
Yeah.
Look at you and your taste buds.
I tell you.
I'm telling you, you got to stop drinking soft drinks.
Well, this is true. Yeah, and
The acid in them and the sweetness ruins your palate, man.
You sound like Robert Picard. Yeah, ruins your palate, Jean-Luc. No, I don't. Be good luck with that. I don't know that I can give that up. I guess I could, but
Try.
There is
Seriously,
no
try.
That's right.
Do or do not.
That's correct. Thank you, Yoda.
Put an effort into it. A Hemingway effort to really live, to taste things, and to put aside the sweet, childlike drinks. And
when I was a child, I acted like a child, spoke like a child. Now I'm an adult. St. Paul.
I was just going to start quoting
I know you're going to do that. So you
put the
guys are
soft
throwing
drinks
St.
aside.
Paul at me from one side and Ernest Hemingway. Gosh, how can I say no to that? That's kind of the right thing.
Yeah. Put the soft drinks aside. I'm down to about one a week, just as a little bit of a treat.
Mm-hmm.
And I think your palate will come back.
Well, okay, that's fair enough. I can do that. But yeah, if
It'll take an effort, because I know for you especially, it's very reflexive. Go in the closet, grab yourself a soft drink.
Yeah, that's kind of how it works, and I do that every single night, and it's just a fantastic thing here to make it all. Give it up, okay? Just give it up, dude. Pull that trigger.
You can
roll
do
that
it.
beautiful bean footage.
We believe in you. You can
Yeah.
do it.
I like to think so too. Yeah, it's.
I like this because he's telling Francis to quit, but not me.
Well, I mean, I guess it is what it is, right? Well, I think he knows that I'm kind of one that really just kind of. That's just what it is.
I drink quite a bit. I don't drink nearly as much as my wife. Soft drinks,
Right.
not alcohol.
Right? Yeah, that's right. Well,
So-
no, I'm with that. I'm okay with all that.
Unsweet tea and water.
Now I draw the line at that. No,
No, I
always
do.
have
I love
to,
the
but
taste of
it's
unsweet tea.
if I'm gonna go without sugar, I'll be okay with it. It's better than water at times.
I would much rather have water over unsweet tea. I'm not big on tea, anyways. Although I like peach tea. I like some of the flavored, like Crystal
Well,
Light stuff.
that sugary stuff is
Yeah.
is-
Now, I at lunch I will have. I usually do take either like a flavored tea or the vitamin water.
Yeah.
And those have some sugar in them.
Yeah.
A little, but not as much as the soft drinks do. And I'm working on it, trying to keep myself
I
going.
drink quite a bit of water. I almost never have anything to drink with a meal other than water.
That's good.
So,
That's good.
you know.
Well, I'm
Partially that's because of the lap band surgery. The any carbonation with food is impossible.
Oh, wow. I was going to say, well, I'll steal from Thomas More and use the word from the line from A Man for All Seasons. I am well rebuked, and I shall do my best. But we need to get back to Ernie, to Hemingway here.
Yes,
because
I want to really push you about personalize this.
Well, I have to, and I'll take this two different ways. One of which is about Hemingway the man, which we've not really talked much about. We talked a lot about the writer and the craft.
I think we've talked about it. I mean,
a little bit. If you put last episode with it, we did a little bit more of that because he had 3 head injuries we know of. In fact, one of which took place in the 20s. A skylight fell on his head. And he's got if you see any of his pictures after, he's got a great big old L scar on his forehead. That was from that, and he got a concussion from that. He has a plane crash later in life, much later in life. 2 of them, that's correct.
Within days.
Within days in Africa. Talk about it. And I wish I had time to go into
that.
So
then there's, kind of a treatment gap there. He's not able to get quite the effective medical attention that he needs. So you're talking alcoholism combined with traumatic brain injuries. Not a good recipe.
That's correct, and that's one of the reasons that eventually he commits suicide is because he gets the diagnosis that he's not. It's not an Alzheimer's one, but it's in many respects before that you could articulate that sort of thing, and he recognizes that he's never going to get any better, and he's going to live this lingering death, and that's one of the reasons he had contemplated suicide a couple times before. And I think a lot of this is traumatic related, not just physical, those traumatic brain injuries, although that had a lot to do with it. It's one of the reasons his later works have a very different tone to them. We talked a lot about what he called the black dog, male, just pattern depression. He struggled with it all the time. It expresses itself sometimes in his writings. But writings, I think, his writings were in many respects a combat against that. It was his talent, it was his gift. He did it better than anybody else, especially once he achieved superstardom, which really happened after A Farewell to Arms, that second novel. Technically third, but it's really second. That, wow, everything after that, everybody watched him. Everything he did. And he could pretty much put out something there, because he was very good at what he did, and it would always sell. And whenever there were a couple after For Whom the Bell Tolls, which was kind of the last of his big works, he never really achieved the success he wanted to again, to that, where he was continuing on the upswing. He didn't do that. It was kind of flat after that. He comes back with The Old Man and the Sea, which is a phenomenal success, but it was kind of like something else, and it was years later. Although he's still writing all this time. Some of it's even nonfiction. He talks about bullfighting, one of his books.
Oh, yeah.
So it's he's always writing from life. And that, to circle back around to your question, what's so admirable about Hemingway? It is his mastery of craft. We love that here. We love mastery of craft. And the more you realize why he's revered is because he had it. He could just, and it was not effortless. He had to work with it. Because he's doing this on a manual typewriter, everything he did was on typewriter. And he's scratching out and making changes and doing all stuff. So you've got tons and tons and tons of every version he ever did. It's not like where it's, you're on Microsoft Word and you just save as, you just delete stuff. You don't know all the backstory unless you save as different versions. You got all that with him. And you realize, he rewrote the beginning of A Farewell to Arms something like 50 times.
There's a quote I read somewhere with the last page of one of his books. I don't remember which one. Literally, the last page.
Yeah.
He rewrote 39 times before he got it the way he was satisfied with it.
Right. See, and that's craft. That's what I love about it.
Determination to make it his own.
Well, not just his own. It's from a writer's perspective. You should anyway. This is me speaking, but Hemingway would agree with this. You are compelled to create, to produce perfection as close as you can get it to there.
Big writers always tell you, writers write.
That's right. You have to do that. You can't sit back. It will eat you alive once you get inside it. Once that beast is awakened, it cannot be put to sleep again. You're compelled to push forward something. Hemingway had that, and the more he did it, that passion he had for it, which is lived out in his life, mind you, the strenuous life. He and Teddy Roosevelt, even though they were different generations, would have loved each other on that sort of thing, because he big game hunting, fishing. He had his own yacht. He even during World War II, he's even out there. Looking for Japanese submarines, German U-boats out in off of Cuba, where he's at, and he's even got it prepared for if he's going to board one and capture one. Seriously, this guy, he's got his stuff together, except in his personal relationships, which was really weird. And I think this is a reflection of the dark side of the man, which I do not admire, of course, but it helps us explain the reality of him, because he's one that lived life to the fullest. There's no question as that. I admire that about him, along with his dedication to craft.
I understand what you mean by that. I would put it better this way, because living life to the fullest, I have a hard time reconciling with 4 Wives.
Yes.
I would say he experienced as much life as he possibly could.
Yes, he was an active person, extremely active. Everybody knows that. That's what he had to do. and which is kind of, you would think, would be at odds with the inherently sedentary life vocation of being a writer. He spends all this time in front of his typewriter constantly, which he did. But he's also out fishing. He's also out big game hunting. He's going to Africa. He's having enormous parties at his place in Cuba, where everybody comes and they stay over with him forever. And it's weekends and weeks of just a long stuff, hospitality.
When you look at him as a writer, and you look at some others as writers, because and partially it's, you can write faster now than you could when you had a typewriter. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
It's just easier. Plus, typing is pretty much drummed into everybody nowadays. Even if you may not touch type, you can type fairly quickly.
Yeah.
When you're in front of a keyboard all the time. But it's interesting because a lot of writers, they'll tell you every day, X amount of hours, X amount of words, doesn't matter. King writes 363 days a year, 2,000 words minimum, every day but his birthday and Christmas. That's discipline.
Yeah,
that's incredible.
But he also loves it too.
Not always. Not
that's
always.
Right. There are times. That's right.
But he is compelled to do it. That's one of the things I find fascinating about somebody like a Hemingway, who obviously is a real writer. He's not playing at it, and yet he still finds time to do all of these other things. Right. Now, I would guess that if you compared the output of a modern writer like King to someone like Hemingway, King dwarfs him easily.
Oh, absolutely. That's right.
Absolutely. Partially, that's the dedication to writing every day.
Yeah, and so many writers produce, a yearly novel.
Yes.
That's
almost,
they publish almost on a schedule.
And
they do. Yeah, many do.
And that is so difficult. You've got to know your craft so well and just really be good at it. Hemingway didn't work that way.
Got to be that guy who writes a couple thousand words a day every freaking day.
That's right.
Yeah.
You cannot take time off, because when you start taking time off, a day becomes 2 days next week. Becomes 3 days.
Yeah,
then a couple of weeks after that, and then it's
and then you turn some of it over to your research staff and this and that.
But Hemingway didn't have any of that.
He did.
Doing it all himself.
Yeah, unless you're a really big writer, starting out, nobody has that.
Except
maybe your spouse,
the beauty of
your kids.
The beauty of Hemingway too.
Well, before the internet, if you wrote on a variety of subjects,
you had to go to the library and travel.
Yeah, travel or have a staff that could research stuff for you. Elmore Leonard had a couple of people that worked for him, and they could research Cuba at the turn of the century for him.
Yeah. Now that's all not necessary, but
of course didn't have to pay him as much then, as relatively speaking.
Yeah. But in many respects, Hemingway, he's writing from his own life experience. But once he's got his first two books done, Sun Also Rises and Farewell to Arms, they're revenue generating. He probably never had to work a day in his life after that, if he didn't want to, because he is a mega success. He's always chasing that next big thing.
Well, and he started writing at a time that was an unforeseen boom. Movies.
Yeah.
And we didn't even talk about that, because all of his, everything he ever wrote has been made into multiple movies.
Right.
And
he did not see some of that money.
He didn't see some of that, yeah.
Because movies didn't start doing him until it was later in life as well.
That's right.
But that was a financial boom.
But most of his novels were made into motion pictures during his lifetime, at least once. Because he dies in 1960.
Right.
And the 50s is when most of those, because they realized, there's some bankability here.
Right.
For
but
those.
He would have been living well off before then.
Long before that, that's correct. Yeah, because he writes these in the 20s. By the time he's in the 30s, he can do what he wants to.
Yeah.
But he's compelled to write. He also wants to be a war correspondent. That's why he goes to Spain. That's where From Whom the Bell Tolls come from, because he wants to be there where this stuff is going on. He was drawn to it. Of course, he spent some time in Spain during the bullfights.
Spanish Civil War is fascinating, if for no other reason than the impact on certain groups of people that it had in this country.
Yeah.
On the draw that it was. It happened during a time when the country was still struggling with the socialism versus capitalism debate. And socialism had not yet lost, although it seems like it never fully loses.
Right.
A discussion for another day. But it's time when the Soviet Union had
turned a lot of things around from the abject poverty that 99% of the country had.
Mm-hmm.
Now it was just 90% of the country. So, I mean, it wasn't as bad. They were doing things. They were producing products for their people and so on, and they looked like a juggernaut. And so you were seeing socialism expand into other places.
Yeah, there was an ascendancy
in China
and
into Spain. And Spain, of course, the bullfights and its history with the conquest in America. It had a romantic aspect to it.
Very much so, yeah.
So
and Hemingway
it was a draw for something like that.
Hemingway was very much a romantic.
Yeah. So Spain, Civil War it's an interesting subject.
Yeah, and that's kind of one of the things that leads to the demise of his second marriage and the rise of his third, because his third wife, Martha Gellhorn, she was a war correspondent, and they became competitors. See, the problem is, Hemingway's traveling all over the world in different places like this, and this is how he ends up getting in trouble, because he's always looking for that next new thing.
Well, and he can't keep it in his pants?
Well, that's part of it, too. Because if you look back at his life, you study it very, very closely, his first wife really was a gem. She really was. They have one child together, and she's the one, Hadley Richardson, that The Sun Also Rises. She retains the rights to it. So that way she would never have to be without. He loved all of his wives, even after he decided to move on. They didn't. They didn't want to. They didn't want to leave him. Hadley she never remarried, I don't believe. And it became a painful thing. But he'd already started with, his second wife, Pauline, who was actually very, very good to him. She took care of him in many ways. Mm-hmm. They were a great match. But Martha Gellhorn was, in many respects, she was just like this lightning in a bottle that he's, attracted to. Next thing you know, he's having sex with her, and, well, that's it. It's over with. Now, she's all the thing. Trouble is, they were so competitive with each other, it couldn't last. There's just no way it would last. His last wife, Mary Welsh, they really had a good relationship. They fought like cats and dogs. I think they all did. Hemingway was just that way. But she would give him for what they stayed together. And she would care for him as he got older and more forgetful and the illness came on. She would be just as much of a hospitality person for them, because people were drawn to Hemingway at this point later in his life. People come to stay for weeks, and they go out on boat trips together, and they're fishing or they're hunting or they're doing stuff like that. She was able to keep up with all that, and all of his wives had those that were hurt by him, and I guess they all were, because his last one, Mary, she's the one who finds him after he commits suicide, and she's the guardian of his legacy. A Movable Feast would not have been published without her. Right. So there's a lot of things that go in. They're all guardians of that. He had difficult relationships with his children. He loved them all, but there's several of them that'll still talk about it later. He wasn't the best dad. He's out chasing fish, or he's chasing tail of another type, and it's just who he was. They kind of get that. That's not what's admirable about Hemingway. I want to make sure I'm clear on that. But the fact that he just didn't sit still. Some of that he was compelled to do by who he was. But there's a romantic attraction to that, I think, for those of us that talked about live that life.
Yeah, we've talked about finding the way to be a person of thought and a person of action. Oh, yeah. He's by definition that.
Absolutely.
Because you can't write without thought, but he's also a person of action as well.
In many respects, he is one of the archetypes for doing both with no limits.
There is no normal life, Wyatt. There's just life.
That's right.
Just get out there and live it. Grab that
spirited
from the great
actress. Sage and philosopher.
Yeah, grab that spirited actress and make her your own.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's right. I mean, that's something Hemingway would say.
And I think that's important for listeners to recognize. We've often talked about flawed people as having something worth knowing about, if not admiring.
Very much so.
And part of that's a recognition that we are all flawed.
Mm-hmm.
And trying to recognize what is good while recognizing the flaws. I mean, when we talked about John Wayne, we recognized some of the flaws that he later came to regret in life, and yet he is still known for some of those flaws, unfortunately. And I think that's a good thing to remember, to remind people that what you believe at one point in life, or what you do at one point in life, should not be the sole defining characteristic of the rest of your life.
Well, that's right.
I mean, with the exception of certain people and things. Yes, we can solely and 100% always define Hitler by the Holocaust. No problem.
Always will, that's right.
The Cultural Revolution and Mao. no problem.
Yeah.
But not everybody rises to that level of...
Yeah, because Hemingway was both a genius of unparalleled levels, as well as a deeply flawed person personally.
Yeah.
And some of this I do believe, and Ken Burns really explores this very well in the last episode of that series, is the fact that his mental illness that he was experiencing, probably due to the brain injuries he's experienced, caused him to be very, very awful. Not just to his wives, but to many others that he would know at times. He was also very, very generous. His children talk about that. He could be the most generous person out there, but he could also be a son of a bitch. And I think we judge him too harshly to forget the fact that there are reasons for that are not always in his, I don't want to say control, because what comes out of your mouth is always in your control. But there are mitigating circumstances. It's complicated, as Trevor Slattery
Trevor
would say.
Slattery hasn't appeared in a few episodes.
That's right.
So
He need to bring it
back.
back. Trevor, come back. It's complicated.
It's complicated.
That's complicated. That's right.
Good stuff, guys. Good stuff.
Well, thank you. Yeah. Let's wrap this bad boy up, and we could talk so much more about the man and about his works.
But
Read the man.
much,
Read it. He's well worth. He's well worth knowing, and so much of him is in those books.
I'm gonna have to find that Ken Burns thing. Then is that on Netflix yet or anything?
Oh no,
or?
it hasn't made it that way. Get your PBS app; it's usually there. You can find it today.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
You can find it out there.
Yeah,
I hardly ever watch anything on broadcast anymore.
Yeah, but
You got me hooked now.
you need to know this man. You need to know him very, very well, and
find
it's so good. The picture, we love Ken Burns, and this was one that I was already huge into him anyway. Nothing that they had about it was a surprise, but the depth that they go into about in just the detail. I know him far better now because of that, and he is somebody that we should definitely know. If you can find that Ken Burns documentary, pour yourself a glass of some adult beverage, sit down, and enjoy it.
Yeah, if you want to understand American arts,
that's correct.
Hemingway is somebody that's got to be part of that study.
You got to be. If there could be only one, he'd be my choice. That's for sure.
Yeah. I mean, there Faulkner, Twain. We talked about that. There's a lot of people, but Hemingway's one of those giants that you've got to. If you want to understand American arts,
you got it. You just have to be able to do that. That's just the way this bad boy rolls.
So, Francis, what's up next?
You're in charge next time, sir.
Watch out, buddies. Watch out. I'm in charge.
You have authority.
I have authority?
That's it. Well, how about that?
We must respect Robert's authority.
That's right, exactly. Because we've been talking about this since one of our earliest times, and we never have gotten around to it until now. Finally, it's getting on the schedule. Alternate history.
And that is my thing.
That's right, because you've read all, not all, because, my God, there's so many, but you've read so many of them. Harry Turtledove is one that I know, and it's one that listeners, you should know, but there's so much around alternate history. We often sit around saying, what if this had happened differently? I mean, we talk about that all the time. The alternate history books take that and run with it and find out the exact consequences of what that really means. And wow, that's a fascinating study. So
absolutely.
We're going to talk about that next time, folks. You're going to love it.
Hope you enjoyed another pointless discussion of eternal questions. Remember, new episodes published every Friday at noon Eastern.
Spread the word. We're on all the major podcast platforms. And leave us a comment or review because that helps others find us.
We're on Instagram, Twitter, as well as our website, snakesandotters.com.
I'm Martin.
And I'm Robert.
And I'm Francis. Join us next week. Same snake time, same otter channel.